Welcome to the debate. Imagine knowing exactly which of your star players is going to tear their hamstring like 3 days before they ever feel a twinge.
Right. Or imagine looking at a tablet and seeing the exact mathematical probability of a passing lane opening up, 2 seconds before the midfielder even receives the ball.
Exactly. For over a century, managing a world-class football club was driven entirely by folklore and, gut feeling. But today, we are right in the middle of a digital revolution. The entire foundation of the sport is shifting from the dugout to the database.
It really is. And for anyone studying sports management today, this raises a deeply critical question. How do future leaders balance this massive, unprecedented influx of data with traditional human instinct?
Right, so my position today is that artificial intelligence is the ultimate objective force multiplier. I argue it systematically strips away the biases and the guesswork of traditional management, providing far superior decision-making frameworks.
And I'll be arguing that a hyper-reliance on this data threatens to destroy the intuitive artistry and really the psychological understanding that fundamentally win football matches. Because if we teach the next generation of sports management professionals that their primary role is effectively data direction.
Which I think it is, by the way.
Well, I think we risk completely atrophying the human intuition required to manage the actual chaos of a dressing room.
I mean, data direction is exactly what the modern game demands now. Let's really challenge this idea that intuition is somehow superior, because for decades, traditional management relied on what we might call a cheesemo. The manager's subjective, borderline mystical gut feeling.
Mystical is a bit harsh, don't you think?
No, it's accurate. Frankly, with the margins between lifting a trophy and facing relegation being so razor thin today, relying on a gut feeling is bordering on professional malpractice. The modern sports manager must view AI not just as a fun competitive advantage, but as the foundational core of their strategy. It eliminates the emotional blindness that has plagued decision-making for a century.
But data is only as objective as the parameters set by the people who program it. Look, I'm not denying that computation has changed the landscape. Obviously it has. But I come at it from a very different angle. Football is profoundly fluid. It's chaotic. And above all, it is driven by human emotion.
Sure, but
AI is exceptional at tracking physical outputs. I'll give you that. But it is completely blind to the unquantifiable variables that actually dictate the outcome of a tournament. I mean, it cannot measure dressing room leadership. It cannot quantify the psychological resilience a squad needs to weather a hostile crowd after going a goal down.
But you're separating.
Let me just finish this thought. If you substitute human intuition entirely for analytics, you replace a beautiful, complex human endeavor with a sterile math equation.
Okay, I see why you might view it as sterile from the outside. But let's actually look at how that math equation manifests on the pitch. Let's start right there, in the dugout, looking at the tactical realities of a match. Because we aren't just talking about, spreadsheets here.
No, obviously not.
We are talking about advanced computer vision. Modern stadiums are equipped with these optical tracking cameras that capture the precise X, Y, and Z coordinates of all 22 players, plus the ball, up to 50 times per second.
Which gives you a fascinating digital twin of the match, absolutely. It's an incredible tool. But what is a manager supposed to do with a digital simulation while the actual, highly emotional game is unfolding 10 yards away from the touchline?
They use it to see the invisible structure of the game. Now, look, if you're a traditionalist listening to this, you're probably rolling your eyes at the idea of a computer telling a manager what is happening right in front of them.
Because they have eyes.
But human eyes are biased, and they're limited. The algorithm calculates what we call pitch control. It doesn't just look at who is standing where. It processes a player's velocity, their acceleration, even their hip orientation, to translate that physical geometry into a predictive cone of space on a tablet.
Right.
It literally shows exactly which team dominates which square inch of the grass at any given millisecond. It's like navigating a ship by looking at the stars versus using a modern GPS system. Why guess when you can just see it?
I understand the mechanism. Truly, I do. But you're assuming that data captures the intent of the player, which it fundamentally does not. It creates a mathematical reality that completely ignores context.
Wait, how does it ignore context if it's tracking exactly what is happening in real time?
Because it doesn't know why it's happening. Look at it this way. An algorithm penalizes a player who drifts out of their optimal positional cone of space, right? It flags them as being out of position, creating a structural vulnerability.
Which they are.
But what if that player drifted because they had to cover a teammate who was visibly panicking? What if the opposing center back just made a mistake, dropped their shoulders, and signaled a sudden loss of confidence? The algorithm doesn't read body language.
Well,
It doesn't sense the visceral shift in the stadium's atmosphere. A human manager feels the tempo. If your eyes are glued to a visualization of pitch control on an iPad, you miss the psychological momentum of the match entirely.
that's a compelling point, I'll admit, though I would frame momentum very differently. What you call a visceral shift in atmosphere, the AI actually recognizes as a measurable shift in team shape. The atmosphere itself might be uncodable, sure, but the reactions to that atmosphere, the distances covered, the structural breakdown under pressure, those are highly measurable.
But by the time it measures it, the moment has passed.
Not with predictive models. Instead of waiting until halftime to review video and say, oh, we lost our shape, predictive models can simulate the next phases of play. They can alert the bench to a high probability passing lane the opponent is exploiting before it results in a shot on target.
But again, this reduces the sport to a two-dimensional grid. Think about a sports management student coming into this environment. If they learn to rely solely on mapped coordinates for their pressing triggers, their intuitive risk assessment vanishes.
I don't see how that follows.
Because a player might be in the exact optimal XY coordinate to initiate a high press, according to your tablet, but the human manager knows that player just took a heavy, painful tackle 2 minutes ago and is psychologically rattled. The system doesn't know he's rattled, it just sees his coordinates.
That's a very specific edge case.
It happens every game. You cannot code human frailty. And more importantly, if your system fundamentally misunderstands a player's real-time decision-making on the pitch, what happens when you use that same flawed context-blind data to actually purchase that player in the transfer market?
Oh, that is an excellent pivot. Because player acquisition, the whole business of building a roster, is precisely where the intellectual rigor of AI is most undeniable. Let's move from match day management to scouting.
Let's do it.
Historically, how did we value players? It was heavily influenced by media hype, agent demands, geographical biases, and, scouts sitting in the rain relying on a subjective gut feeling. It was incredibly inefficient.
It was human empathy assessing human character, which is exactly what sports management students are in danger of losing today.
Empathy doesn't tell you if a player actually improves your team's win probability, though. Look at the democratization of the global transfer market. AI allows smaller clubs to compete with oil-backed giants by finding objective value.
Value on a spreadsheet.
No, actual value. Think about how recommendation algorithms work on a streaming service like Spotify. It doesn't just look at the broad genre of music you listen to, it analyzes the underlying acoustic traits, the tempo, the key, the instrumentation, to recommend a track by an obscure artist that mathematically matches your taste. AI in football scouting does exactly the same thing.
I see where you're going with this. The clustering algorithms.
Exactly. The AI takes a $100 million superstar and breaks down their underlying performance metrics. Things like expected assists, which is simply the mathematical probability that a specific pass will lead to a goal based on historical data, or progressive carries, which quantifies a player's ability to drive the ball forward into dangerous zones rather than just safely passing sideways.
Right, the underlying numbers.
So the algorithm scans a global database of tens of thousands of players, and it finds, say, an undervalued 19-year-old in a second-tier league in Scandinavia or South America whose underlying metrics match the superstar with a 95% similarity, but at a fraction of the cost. You aren't guessing if they fit the system. The AI mathematically guarantees their output profile matches your tactical framework.
Okay, but your streaming analogy actually proves my point perfectly.
How so?
An algorithm can easily recommend an audio file because an audio file doesn't get homesick. A 19-year-old human being from South America moving to Manchester does.
Well, sure, but the data narrows the search field. It finds the talent in the first place.
It finds a statistical clone, yes. But it creates a massive blind spot regarding psychological integration. This is the exact risk I'm talking about for future sporting directors. You run a system compatibility simulation, right? It tells you the angles of a player's passes fit your manager's tactics.
Which is vital information.
Of course it is.
But what the algorithm explicitly does not tell you is whether this teenager possesses the psychological resilience to adapt to a new country where they don't speak the language. It cannot simulate how they will respond to a hostile 24-hour media cycle dissecting every single misplaced pass.
But that's...
Gut feeling in traditional scouting is not just guesswork. A veteran scout talks to the player. They watch how they interact with their parents. They observe how they treat the kit man, and they gauge their character. If you buy the perfect statistical clone, but they crumble under the psychological weight of playing for a massive club, your $15 million data-driven investment is completely worthless.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning at all, because you're presenting a false dichotomy. Utilizing an algorithm to identify the optimal player from a global pool of 50,000 doesn't prevent your scout from flying out and having a conversation with him afterward.
It changes the nature of the evaluation, though.
It does the heavy lifting. The AI clears the noise. It isolates the statistically elite candidates so human intuition can be applied selectively, rather than randomly sitting in the rain hoping you stumble across a star.
My concern is that as organizations become more and more reliant on the algorithm, the human evaluation becomes a mere formality. When the data department says, this player is a 98% match, the scout's intuition is fundamentally overridden by the sheer authority of the math.
It's overwritten because the math is objective, whereas the scout's intuition might be skewed by a single good performance they just happen to watch in person. But let's follow this player's journey.
All right.
We've used the algorithm to scout them, we've signed them. Now we have to keep them physically on the pitch and maximize their specific output. This brings us to player welfare and sports medicine.
Yes. This is where we transition from treating them like data points on a scouting report to treating them like race cars that just need their telemetry checked.
Well, if treating them like race cars extends their careers by 5 years, then it's a completely necessary evolution. In world football, players are a club's most valuable assets. A single hamstring tear to your star forward can derail an entire campaign. Traditional management reacted to injuries. AI proactively prevents them.
By using biometrics?
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanism. Players wear biometric sensors during training. The system is tracking high-intensity decelerations, metabolic power, sleep quality, all of it.
And spitting out an injury risk assessment.
A highly precise one. For example, the AI might flag that a midfielder's high-speed deceleration output has dropped by exactly 4.5% over 3 days. Simultaneously, their heart rate recovery time has slowed by a fraction of a second.
Okay.
To the human eye, the player looks entirely fine. They're running normally, they tell the manager they feel perfectly fine. But the AI recognizes a biomechanical compensation strategy. The kinetic chain is breaking down in a way the human eye physically cannot see. The system flags it, the player is rested, and a catastrophic muscle tear is averted before the player even knew they were at risk.
Look, I do not dispute the medical utility of biometrics. Obviously, keeping players healthy is paramount. But let's place this exact scenario into the context of actual football management.
All right, let's do it.
Let's say it is the eve of a cup final, the biggest match of the decade for this club. The algorithm flags that your team captain's mechanical output has dropped by that exact 4.5%. The AI dictates, based on its completely objective thresholds, that they must be rested to prevent a hamstring tear.
Then the data is telling you the asset is compromised. You sit them. You adjust your tactical shape.
And that right there is the trap. You just lost the final.
Because I rested an injured player?
You sit them because you are adhering to the objective threshold of the data. But the human manager knows something the algorithm does not. The manager knows this captain is the absolute bedrock of the dressing room. Their mere physical presence on the pitch elevates the performance of the 10 men around them by a margin no biometric sensor can possibly quantify.
But their hamstring...
If this cup final goes to extra time and a penalty shootout, the manager knows this captain has the immense psychological resilience needed to step up and bury a penalty in front of 80,000 screaming fans.
By strictly following the algorithm's objective threshold, you have removed the manager's crucial intuitive risk assessment. You might save a hamstring, sure, but you forfeit the intangible leadership required to actually win the trophy.
I understand the romance of that scenario, truly. But let's look at the harsh reality of it. You're asking future managers to gamble a multi-million-dollar asset on the romantic notion of a captain's aura.
It's not aura, it's leadership.
If you ignore the AI and that player's hamstring inevitably tears in the first 15 minutes of the final, you have just wasted a substitution. You've ruined your tactical game plan and you've destabilized the team in front of millions of people. That is exactly the kind of emotional, old-school management that costs clubs titles.
It's not romanticism, it's understanding human psychology. If you manage purely to minimize statistical risk, you engineer all the bravery out of the sport.
But you replace it with optimization, which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Highly controlled environments, like set pieces. Free kicks and corners account for roughly 30 to 35% of all goals scored in modern tournaments.
They do.
Because these are restarted moments of play, they aren't chaotic. They are mathematical puzzles just waiting to be solved.
Puzzles played by highly unpredictable humans.
But against predictable defensive structures, clubs are now using deep learning models to analyze thousands of historical corner kicks. The AI categorizes the opponent's defensive setups, whether they use zonal marking or man marking. It runs thousands of simulations to locate structural vulnerabilities.
And prints out a playbook?
It literally tells the coaching staff the exact optimal delivery zone, the exact run patterns attackers should make to manipulate the defense. It even identifies which specific opposing defender is statistically most likely to lose their marker when subjected to an overlapping run. It turns a scramble in the penalty box into a mathematical certainty.
A mathematical certainty until the ball is actually kicked in the pouring rain under immense pressure by a human foot. Look, I can see that the predictive modeling for set pieces is brilliant in theory.
Thank you.
But theory often falls apart in practice. And this brings us back to the core warning for anyone entering sports management today. The data is an incredible map. It can show you the vulnerabilities in a man marking system. It can show you the expected assists of a teenager in South America. But a map cannot drive the car.
Okay, but you wouldn't drive the car blindfolded either, which is essentially what traditional management was doing for a century.
Nobody is advocating for blindfolds. Data literacy is the baseline now. It really is the price of admission. But my position remains firm. The defining challenge for the next generation of executives is knowing when to put the tablet down.
Right.
The unpredictable genius of a creative playmaker finding a pass that breaks every expected tactical model, that cannot be coded. The emotional intelligence required to lead a diverse group of young men under immense pressure cannot be found in a biometric report. The best data in the world is utterly useless if you don't possess the intuition to understand the psychology of the human beings executing the plan. The risk of losing that human intuition in the decision-making process is the greatest vulnerability facing modern sports management.
Well, I would summarize by saying that AI has irreversibly elevated the intellectual rigor of the sport. It isn't about eliminating the human element at all. It's about eliminating human error.
Mobile scouting to uncover brilliant, undervalued players, AI provides an objective framework that intuition simply cannot match. For students entering this field, understanding that the game is fundamentally driven by data analytics is what will separate the elite from the obsolete.
As long as they remember that the data serves the humans, not the other way around.
And I think that is the perfect point of convergence. The future of sports management does not belong strictly to the traditionalist, relying solely on instinct, nor does it belong to the rigid data scientist who views players purely as data points.
Exactly.
The organizations that will dominate the next century of world football will be those that master the highly complex synthesis of human artistry and machine intelligence. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the invisible forces shaping the beautiful game. We encourage you to look at your own professional decision-making frameworks, whatever your field might be, and consider, where do you draw the line between the data you trust and the intuition you refuse to lose?